Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to 1952 to be discussing the case of Mahmood Hussein Mattan. His last name is spelled M-A-T-T-A-N. I always wanted to say Mattan, but when I was listening to some of the audio about this case, it was always pronounced Mattan. So we're going to go with that. But before 1952, we actually have to go back way earlier in time, to the 1800s, to understand this case. You see, this is a blatant case of wrongful conviction. It's an obvious case of wrongful conviction of a man in Wales who was born in British Somaliland. But once again, to get there, in the 1800s, there was kind of a wave of immigration of people of Somali descent coming from Africa to England, mostly through tradesmanship, merchants, seamen, things of that nature. But what happened is, World War I broke out in 1914, so they needed soldiers from all over the world. It was a genuine world war, and the British and French colonies became enormously beneficial to the Allied powers. There's even a great statue in Madagascar about the soldiers from Madagascar that fought in World War I. It's like this was a genuine world war. So many people, many Somalis, came from the former British Empire to Great Britain. We're talking in England and Wales and Scotland, and very specifically in Cardiff, where this story takes place. Okay, so that's 1914. The war ends 1918, right? 1919, we have race riots going on in the United Kingdom. Like the British Empire, whatever you'd like to call it, whatever name is most suitable in the historical context. And the thing is, though, this racial tension does not go away. Is that what we're going to be talking about today, just a case of racial tension? Well, let's see. I mean, there are a few more elements that are involved with that. I wouldn't really say that that's the only issue. But it's definitely going to be something that we're going to examine with Mahmood Hussein Mattan. Now, Mahmood comes from Somaliland into Cardiff, Wales, right? And he's working as a seaman. And 3 months after being there, he gets married to a woman in Cardiff. They are an interracial couple. They're dealing with lots of racism. First, they have 2 children together. Then, when his wife is pregnant with their 3rd child, he decides he's not going to be living on the seas anymore. He does not want to be away from his family for long periods of time, so he takes a job at the steelworks. Now he is kind of more centered in Cardiff. He's going to be there all the time, and we are finally at 1952. This brings us to the murder of Lily Volpert, a person who was working in a dress shop. She was a shopkeeper. She was murdered, and 100 pounds was stolen, which was way more valuable back then than it is now. Actually, somewhat of a substantial robbery. And one of the big things we have to recognize here is Lily Volpert's neck was slashed with a razor, which will be, of course, an important detail to look forward to as the story continues. So the thing is, why would they blame Mahmood Hussein Mattan? He had a very clear alibi at the time. He said he was at a theater. And it's like, of course, there are going to be people there who can vouch for his whereabouts. I mean, why would they blame him? Well, some of the things here are witnesses. A very particular witness was Harold Cover, a man of Jamaican descent, who placed Mattan at the scene of the crime, saying that he saw him by the dress shop. And one of the things, though, is, initially, Cover blames somebody else. He says that there was a different person that he saw. He gave the description of somebody named Tahir Gass, G-A-S-S, who is also of Somali descent, mind you. So, which one do you believe? Why would he suddenly change his story? Well, the family of Lily Volpert actually decided to offer a reward, if led to the capture and conviction and all that. So, if Cover believes that Mattan is going to be convicted more easily, he wants that reward money. And this is something where we said it's not only something like racism going on, because once again, Harold Cover is Jamaican. This isn't only a case of racial tension, this is also a case of greed. There was a girl who was nearby the dress shop who also identified a black African man in the scene, like at the scene of the crime, placing him there. But she said very specifically that it was not Mahmood Hussein Mattan. Well, where are the lawyers in this? Where's the legal system in this? Who's arbitrating this? Who's trying to figure out what side is telling the truth? You know, it's like, one of the things they talk about with this is that the barrister for Mahmood Hussein Mattan was even talking about how he's kind of like half savage and things like that, and people were just thinking that that's actually working against his case. They're just sort of thinking that, you know, like, oh wow, well this guy's obviously an animal, he's obviously deranged, he must be guilty, because it's coming from his own defense. One of the other things that held Mahmood Hussein Mattan back is that he really didn't speak English very well. And that really surprised me when I was reading that. It's like, what? He married a woman in Wales after being there for 3 months and he didn't speak English very well? How did they have a relationship? Was she fluent in Somali or something? But then I began to recognize, you might have known some people who have boyfriend or girlfriend from a different background. The conversational material that you use for a relationship is really quite different than dealing with legal proceedings and all that. There's a line here, though, when it says about how Mahmood Hussein Mattan was refused, or he personally refused, the services of a translator. I mean, I actually think there is a possibility that Mattan didn't actually refuse that, and he could have just been denied it. The way this case is sort of played out, it really seems like the law just wasn't on his side. But where is this all going? Why this guy? If they have Tahir Goss and they're just racially insensitive, why not put all the blame on him? Or if they have Harold Cover at the scene of the crime, this guy of Jamaican descent, why not drift the focus onto him? Why does it have to be Mahmood Hussein Mattan? Why him? The kind of thing that I'm examining with this, and just sort of to give my own personal hypothesis on the subject, is the authorities in Wales at the time flat out just did not care. They just didn't show any sort of humanity toward Mattan. They want to get the case wrapped up as soon as possible. Harold Cover, the witness, he wants to claim his reward, and that's the only thing that he cares about. So it's like they were just showing a certain insensitivity. And yes, this is somewhat racially motivated. They're just like, we don't care about this guy at all. Let's just get this case over. Of course he's guilty. Even if he's not guilty, we don't really care. You can send him to jail. He can be hanged. He means nothing to us. Let's get this case open and shut so we don't have to deal with it. That's kind of my own personal hypothesis of what happened. Insensitivity on all fronts. It's not only race. No, absolutely not. It's also that they just wanted to close the case and get on with things because they didn't want to draw it out and examine all of this evidence for a black man. I mean, race isn't the only motivation in this, but it's one of them. Okay, so where does that bring us from here? Mahmood Hussein Mattan is convicted, and he is sent to the Cardiff prison. There he is hanged, and he was the last person to be hanged in the Cardiff prison. But his wife didn't even know about it until she showed up for a visit. She just went there to visit him, knowing though that it would happen at some point, but she shows up there, and they just inform her that he has been hanged. And this starts the kind of decade-long search for her to get the truth. She knows that he's innocent, and it seems like the family of Mattan probably had a very clear understanding of his innocence because of his genuine alibi of not being there, of being at a theater at the time of the murder. Okay, though, this goes on until 1998, when they're kind of just like, they finally overturn the ruling. They admit that Mahmood Hussein Mattan was wrongfully convicted and wrongfully executed. And the family was awarded, in one account it says £750,000, but in an article by Sophia Muhammad, who wrote an article about this case, it says it's actually 1.4 million, but I mean, not sure exactly which number it is, but they got a very substantial amount of money. Sophia Muhammad wrote a very detailed article about this, and there is going to be a book coming out soon about the case of Mahmood Hussein Mattan. It really just goes to show you the intersections of so many different things at once. You have all of these different problems culminating together in 1952. You have people who are going after their own greed, like Harold Cover, who just wants to reward money and doesn't care what happens to Mattan. And then you also have people like the legal system, who is just like, oh, he's just an ordinary black man, we don't care about him, so they don't care about doing their jobs. So you have insensitivity on all fronts. But then, if Mahmood Hussein Mattan didn't murder Lily Volpert, who did? Well, one of the biggest things is, we mentioned that razor at the beginning. Later on, years later, Harold Cover, the Jamaican witness who identified Mattan, attempted the murder of his own daughter by trying to cut her throat with a razor. What do you make of that? And Tahir Gas, the other man of Somali descent, was declared insane. He was sent to an institution. I mean, it's most likely one of those two men was the perpetrator, but I really remember that very specific detail about Harold Cover attempting the murder of his daughter with a razor, and I'm just like, he seems to be in the scene of the crime, in the vicinity of the scene of the crime at the time. How else would he have been able to have identified Mattan? He would have definitely had to have been there. And it's very likely that he did indeed commit the murder. But the thing is, though, this is just a case of injustice because it's like apathy, apathetic, not caring, indifferent to somebody's well-being and somebody's life, on the one hand because of your own selfishness, on the other hand because of ignorance and a lack of respect for humanity. Talking about the legal system in Cardiff at the time. So that's kind of where the sort of story ended up. The family got they got their death. They got the wrongful death suit ruled in their favor, and Mahmood Hussein Mattan's body was moved from the felon cemetery to a different cemetery, and on his tombstone they wrote "Death by Injustice." And it's like, this is just a case of where it was obvious that he didn't have to die. He didn't have to be hanged for a crime he didn't commit. And Mahmood's son, Omar Mattan, was actually found dead on a beach in Scotland in 2003. And it was also some very suspicious circumstances about his death. I'm going to try and research that one a little bit more. Maybe we can have a discussion on that one. But it seems most likely, or at least one article reports, that he died from drowning after being intoxicated. And we just got to say, when people are intoxicated near bodies of water, the risk of drowning is so much higher. Well, you know, it's like, once again, this is kind of a difficult subject to tackle because we know mostly what happened to Mattan. Almost all parties, including the UK government, admits that he was wrongfully executed, wrongfully convicted. It's more just about looking at all the sort of social problems that came together in 1952, the decades-long interracial, intercultural conflicts between the Welsh and the British and the Somalis. And it's like, all of that stuff just came together at this sort of moment. And it kind of is sort of a turning point. If you look at the 1950s and the 1960s, that is a turning point worldwide for sort of awareness toward racially motivated issues. Sadly, the 1950s and the 1960s were not any sort of endpoint for things like greed. Motivations such as greed still carry on completely into the new millennium. They are a current. That's a current that is just running through us. And I don't really know if that one's going to go away anytime soon. But the issue is that it's just a lot of decades-long problems all came together at once. I mean, this is something that could have easily been avoided, especially if the legal system had done a much more thorough job. It's not only on Harold Cover for providing the false story. One of the things we didn't even mention yet is that 4 people were kind of looking at sort of something similar to a lineup, and they did not identify Mahmood Hussein Mattan as being in the area at all, and his family seemed to be completely certain of that. Mahmood Hussein Mattan was completely certain of that. It's just that it's a case of injustice. Killed by injustice. Death by injustice. And it's one of those things, though, that we aren't completely away from all of it, too. It's a sad thing to admit in 2019, the time of this recording, you'd think that we are just completely away from things like that, but they carried on into the new millennium. we've definitely made improvements since the 1950s, since 1952, but humanity has a long way to go. And I guess that's going to be kind of the concluding the end point for our discussion on Mahmood Hussein Mattan. And this is one, though, it's been a little difficult to kind of just talk about and sort of narrate because it's got some historical elements and it's got some sort of personal stories, anecdotes about Mattan and his wife, as well as just the intersectionality of the whole thing, the cultural elements of the whole thing. It's so many things happening at once, and you're just like, what angle would you really tackle this from? Not to mention the sort of theories about the other perpetrators, Harold Cover and Tahir Gas. So it's like lots of things going on at once. But what do you think about this case? And if you have anything to say at all, or if there's another case about kind of death by injustice that you'd like to talk about, drop a comment below. I'd like to hear from you.